Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. As you can see, I have dressed up for the occasion. I am not the sanest I have ever been, but I am wearing my dress of tasteful nudes. As you can see, there are... Someone's upset that I'm talking. He obviously does not want to be present in the conversation, so it's his fault if he's not joining in. In any case, back to my nudes. This is also my finest tiara. It's also my newest to the collection. I do have a collection. Don't ask me questions about that. I have a cup of coffee. I wanted to drink alcohol. I felt that would tip things over into the less lucid area of existence. So anyway, for some reason, Mr. Blake has decided he's very proud of the way I'm handling this, which is not excellently. I will just be very upfront about that. There's not a lot of excellence to the way I'm handling this. But I have only had one significant breakdown, but it was yesterday, so it is quite recent. So things are going fine. Okay, so Orlando, which I recently finished, I will say, someone did mention that they have picked it up and stopped and started a few times, and I totally get that because it is quite boring, and it's a little bit, like, initially it's a little bit hard to pick up on the tone. I feel like it has a very sort of dry, ironic wit to it, and is much, much more interesting once Orlando becomes a woman. Hopefully by now this is not a twist, since everyone kind of knows that that's the case. I found that what was very interesting was once he's a woman, he has a lot of she at that point has a lot of commentary about fashion that I felt was really, really interesting, metaphorically and literally. And also the commentary on the age, particularly the commentary on the Victorian age, which I have a lot of judgment about. I will save this until next week because that's when we're gonna like really have a conversation, but I have like a lot of issues with Regency romances. And I mean, on the one hand, I love the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, just like any normal human woman. And I find the time period to be very like exquisite in terms of watching it on the screen. However, I have a lot of issues with the society of the time. I mean, it's just like the height of classism, the height of gender stratification. That's where you really get a divide between things being male or female is like really, really stark in the Victorian period, which I think has been damaging like into perpetuity. But that is something that we will address next week. I felt a very strong kinship with Virginia as she was kind of reflecting on this as both Orlando and Orlando's biographer. And I also found the closing discussion about the self and coming to terms with the self or the many selves, to be very interesting. So if you're having trouble with the book or you have tried to read it in the past and you had trouble with it before, I encourage you to keep going. I will be very honest that I think I did a lot of skimming in order to get to the parts that were interesting, but by the time I did, I was highlighting a lot of passages. So, or maybe I'll just save you the time and bring up what I thought was interesting. It's fun to read satire, especially because I write a lot of satire. The Real World series, the Real World Hogwarts and the Real World Ministry of Magic are both, people describe them as crackfic, but they're not. I mean, they're nuts, but they're not cracked. They are satire. Hortense and Thibaut, characters that I think people who take them very literally have a problem with them. People who take them very literally get very upset when they come up again, and people who enjoy them are those who kind of understand that they exist as simultaneously to point out the absurd and to be the absurd. But also they're kind of my method of breaking the fourth wall. You'll find that the more ridiculous a character that I write, the more I get away with saying really starkly controversial things. Luna Lovegood is kind of similar, and I think J.K. Rowling used her in a very similar way. That's like, we're going to take this character who's very absurd and who you can only take some things they say as wisdom, but when they are wise, they are very, very wise, and it's because they are looking at things from this sort of unconventional angle. This is what I enjoy about satire, because you can take this sort of like almost blithe, innocent tone of like, I'm just making an observation, and some people will be like, well, this is absurd and brush it away, and other people will be like, oh my God, this is actually a very valid thing to say. So yeah, not to say that the real world is entirely full of valid points or that everything Hortense says is completely lucid, because that's not the case. She is there for comic relief a lot of the time. But also that there's a lot of honesty and humor. I think this is something that's very important about writing humor, or why humor, it can be a way to say more than drama sometimes. And I think that's something that you've probably talked about in English class when you've studied Shakespeare's comedies. And there's such a fine line between comedy and drama, but just because something isn't said in a serious tone doesn't mean it's not perfectly intellectual. This has been a tangent. So most of this is about writing, but I'll try to make it as universal as I can in terms of creation itself. First one, this is an inspiration question. I have a story I'm working on, and when I began, I was so inspired. Now that I'm 20,000 words in, I find myself dragging. And so then it seems like they had another idea and they're more inspired with that one. So how do you balance stories, especially when one is new and exciting and the other is in the harder phases? This is going to connect a lot with a later question about how to stay focused, because I think this isn't really so much an inspiration question as a focus question. It's funny that you open with this is an inspiration question, and actually I think this has nothing at all to do with inspiration. The middles of books, especially the early middles, the 20,000 words, that's like right when you're getting into the problem has maybe been established. Everything that you initially write is, of course, interesting because it's new and exciting, and you don't really have to worry about the consequences. By the time you hit 20,000 words, everything you say is a potential plot hole that needs to be filled. So that's when it starts to feel strenuous. That's when it starts to feel like work. So basically what you're telling me is that you like the inspired imagination part and you don't like the work. So let's just be honest with ourselves about that this is not about inspiration, it's about focus. It's about having trouble with the grind. At the 20,000 word mark, that is absolutely for me as well, where I'm like, oh crap, this is the unfortunate part where I have to start trying to make connections between the things that I first started writing and the way that I'm going to maybe end this. First of all, you have to start thinking about how you're going to end it, which can feel a lot like work, because that means actually nailing down things and not just having the open-endedness of I'm going to build something brand new. I understand the boredom concept, because yeah, work is boring. That's kind of the thing about work, is that having to do it is tiresome and mundane. So, and I'm not immune to that. I enjoy the grind, I think, more than most people, because I like the feeling of things coming together, and I'm willing to wait for it. I do have a certain amount of patience, and that is obviously something that a person can learn, especially when you realize, when you've gotten to that 20,000 word point as many times as I have gotten to that point. Every time I get that sense of, oh, this has become difficult. This has become something that I don't particularly want to work on anymore. But that's actually fairly short-lived, that once you get to 30,000, 40,000, then it feels fun again, because that's when you get back on, it's like how things get really slow right when you're getting up to the top of the roller coaster, and you just have to get over that and just come all the way down, and then it gets fun again. So I think when you have practice of getting beyond that, it gets easier. As for getting yourself through this right now, I don't think there's anything wrong with working on more than one thing at a time. I always do that. I like to have projects in different phases. So I have something that I'm right at the beginning, so I'm still in that inspiration phase. I have something that I'm in the middle, and it's kind of that really hard work phase. And then I'm doing something that's probably revision. So something that's not taxing like the way writing a book actually is. Which I noticed when this whole quarantine thing was first starting, someone said something that was like, well, I guess a lot of people are going to realize that it doesn't just mean that free time isn't the only thing you need to write a book, which is, it's a lot of work. And this is why I say all the time, the writing is a craft, and part of that craft is the actual strenuous labor of it. So you're in the labor stage. I know I keep saying this, but I just want to be very clear about this, that I get it. This is the worst part. And how do you get through this? The same way you get through the worst part of anything. You just get through it. So one way is to break things down into manageable pieces. I usually have a weekly word count goal for each project that I'm working on. And then I break that down like per day. So it'd be like, okay, if I'm going to write 5,000 words this week in this particular piece, then I'm going to try to arrange my schedule so that I can get that done. So like if this thing is really easy for me to write, then I might save it till later towards the end of the week. So maybe your like project that you're excited about, that's something you have to save as a reward. You can save that until later. And at the beginning of the week, when you're still kind of freshly energized, I mean, the days of the week are kind of nothing now, so this is tough, but you just want to arrange your schedule kind of wisely. First of all, you want to make a schedule. You want to, if finishing this manuscript is important to you and doing the work in order to get that later payout of having the finished manuscript is important to you. Oh, good. There's a dog barking. Then you really want to kind of treat this like a deadline at work. You might want to create an artificial deadline for yourself. So it's like, this week I'm going to write 2,000 words in this book. Because as you chip away at that kind of difficult period in the book, you eventually come out onto the other side. There will be a point when you have worked through the problems that you hit in the middle, which everyone does. And I did write a blog post about drafting imperfectly, where you just get through it. Because yes, this is hard. Keeping your focus is the hardest thing you do as a writer. It is. And how you get yourself through that is being kind of your own taskmaster, because you cannot wait for inspiration. Inspiration is like, I've said before, the whole my mom says God laughs at our plans. Waiting for inspiration, God is just laughing. Or, whoever God is in this scenario. The muse she finds this hilarious. She is not going to pop up when you want her to. That's not how things work. I also was telling someone recently, they were saying how they couldn't see themselves getting married. And I was like, well, the thing about love is that love is inconvenience. And that's true with creativity as well. Ideas are inconvenient. You don't have them when you want them. They happen inconveniently. And that's part of the love. Like that's what's exciting about inspiration, is that it feels like love. It's new, it's exciting. But you don't get to just abandon things when they're not exciting anymore. And we're gonna talk about something mildly related. So I'm just going to move on before this becomes like a weird rant. Too late. So the other thing I got asked was, how do you stay focused on writing when working from home? Do you use any apps that stop you from going online? How do you stay in the world you create in your novel and write? So this is very, very closely related. This is more of a day-to-day question, how do you stay focused? Whereas the previous question is like, how do you stay focused in the difficult part of a project? Day-to-day focus is like, okay, first of all, I swear by to-do lists. And I break my time down into small, kind of manageable pieces. I kind of know what I'm going to be working on in like hour blocks. Some general focus rules. If you're the kind of person who procrastinates, which like all of us are in some respect, I procrastinate a lot when it comes to exercise, which is a thing I hate to do, which is why classes were so good for me, because now I'll be like, okay, I'm going to go for a run. I'm not going to run for like an hour. I'm going to like wander around my house doing I don't know what. I truly have no idea. It's amazing how much time I can waste before I go for a run. I'm like rearranging my playlist for like 20 minutes. It's amazing what we'll put off in order to not do the thing we have to do. So first of all, you need to find a way to hold yourself accountable, which for me is lists, because crossing things off a list is like a magical feeling. You really want to give yourself rewards as much as possible. That really is how best to motivate someone, is to make them feel good. And so when you're motivating yourself, you want to come up with ways to make yourself feel good about what you've accomplished, as opposed to feeling bad or guilty about what you haven't done. I really struggle with that a lot. I think you want to come up with constructive breaks. I don't use any apps or anything like that, but It is a little bit harder to work under these unique circumstances. So I've had to break down the periods of I don't have uninterrupted time like I used to have. Mr. Blake is here all the time, and so I don't get large blocks of silence. I used to be able to write 4 or 5 hours straight with no breaks. That's not the case anymore. So I have had to kind of write in a little break after like an hour that is not scrolling social media. That break is for something to let my brain do something else. So at this point, it's like coloring in my coloring book or something like that. It's something constructive so that I'm not letting myself get distracted necessarily. It's more like something meditative, but I don't like meditation. I did read someone said something about meditation not being great for people who have intrusive thoughts, which is like all of my thoughts are intrusive. That's why I write them all down. Anyway, you might even break it down to smaller pieces than that. People do writing sprints a lot, and that seems to be effective. So whatever period you can focus, set an alarm if you want. You're going to write for 30 minutes, and then after 30 minutes, you can do whatever you want. I mean, okay, I'm mentally unwell, and part of my mental illness means that a lot of times I can be really hyper-focused. So I don't know that a lot of what I do is helpful advice. But what I do think is good is I think a lot of times the main thing that's going to help you is to just start doing it. I have said a few times that a lot of like the reason I don't advise much pre-writing is because I think that a lot of people are just procrastinating out of anxiety, out of a fear or like a perfectionism kind of drive that's like, well, I don't want to do it wrong, so I don't want to start at all. Always just doing it, just jumping in is honestly the best way to do most things. And just working in general is going to make you feel better. If that's one of your problems, then just kind of getting going and actually working is going to help. Put your phone somewhere else. I can tell you right now, the social media is not that interesting. If it's becoming a thing where you're constantly going on social media and it's distracting, I think it's because you are having trouble focusing on the task at hand. In which case, you might want to try something like I said, like doing writing sprints where you just write for 30 minutes, take a 5-minute break, write for another 30 minutes, see how that does. If you need to break that down into smaller sprints, go for it. If you can do longer than that, keep going. If that alarm goes off and you want to keep going, keep going. And then kind of, I would make a note to yourself of how long you can keep focusing before you feel like you need a break. But rather than using that 5-minute break or whatever to go on social media, go like walk around, stretch or something, get some motion. Being sedentary is just bad for you in general. It's not good for your mental health, and it's definitely not good for your physical health. In terms of creation, take care of yourself. Take that 5-minute break to go get a glass of water and kind of reset. Obviously, this is the challenge of existing. We are not machines. We are humans who have needs, and kind of identifying your need, knowing that you don't actually want to scroll social media, kind of deciding what you actually want and then pinpointing how to address that. I mean, we're not machines, but you can troubleshoot yourself like a machine. Run that program and see what's going on. See what you're actually craving. If you've got like a good friend who wants to help you with this and they can like text you at the end of your writing sprint to be like, okay, so how'd it go? What are you excited about? If maybe what you're missing is the actual social aspect, that might be interesting. I think it's very possible that a lot of us are craving social interaction, but scrolling through social media isn't the same thing. So, yeah. Again, I feel like I'm lecturing you, but I'm also kind of lecturing myself because I am feeling that, I'm feeling that weird, like, I don't normally get distracted or think about what's happening on my Instagram feed. I'm not really that interested in what's happening just generally and like, because who really updates all the time? It's like celebrities, and I don't need to know what they're doing. But I find myself glancing at my phone and being like, I wonder what's going on in there. And I really think it's just a craving to be part of the world. But the truth is that the only thing that actually makes me feel part of the world is my art. The only thing that makes me actually feel good about myself and my value to society is what I can create for it. So obviously I need to take breaks. We all need to take breaks. A lot of times for me that will mean reading, or I'll give myself something to look forward to. So like I'll save an episode of something for after I've done my work. Rewards. So that's definitely one way to do things. I have to say that if you can't bring yourself to focus on your writing, then I don't necessarily know that it's worth it for that to be such a big focus in your life. The thing is that your art should primarily be your joy. Because let's be real, it doesn't make us a lot of money, / any money. In a lot of cases, it doesn't make us any money at all. So in terms of your art, this should be something that you do to feel joy in your life, to feel like you are alive. I talked last week about creation being catharsis. It should be cathartic for you. Creation should be the thing that rejuvenates you. I mean, the reason that I've been able to not be on medication and just purely create instead is because it is stabilizing for me to just constantly have this output of here's what's happening to me internally, and here's how I am turning it into order. I'm taking this chaos and I am ordering it with what I'm creating. And the reason I'm telling you this is because if creating is not bringing you joy, then stop doing it. Find another way to create. Find another thing that does bring you joy. I don't think it's social media. I want to believe that this is an easy fix where if you just you're just getting distracted because it's a weird time, or, sitting still is difficult to do. So then, cutting your time into shorter blocks where you can be more productive during them is probably that should work. And if it doesn't work, then this thing that you're making, I don't think it's making you happy. And I don't necessarily think you need to do it. Obviously, again, we're talking about a scenario where this thing that you're doing is not paying your rent. I'm assuming it's not keeping you alive. So not in the logistical day-to-day sense. If it's not your job, then take a break. If it's not your job and you can't focus on it, then it's not the thing that you need to be doing right now. I think right now we really need to focus on renewing ourselves as much as possible. What's hard about right now is that we don't know what there is to look forward to. I said already that what we want to do for ourselves is create reward, but the problem with the way the world is currently is that we have absolutely no idea when we're going to be rewarded for what we've been doing. I have tickets to the Loverfest West Taylor Swift's concert. I have absolutely no idea if that's still even going to happen. It seems to me like it probably isn't, because a huge stadium full of people this summer feels too close to this whole thing to be doing. So I don't know. Mr. Blake, he trains all year for his race season, which is in the fall. Is that going to be affected by this? I don't know. So a lot of what is providing us the relief of moving forward in life and knowing why we exist and being happy about our existence is kind of tabled right now, which is really hard. I think if you're having trouble identifying why you have this sort of underlying sense of dread or any anxiety, or if you're already prone to anxiety and depression and it's especially bad right now, I think it's because the ways that we cope are not available to us because we do not know what the end of this story looks like. We are in a weird dystopian book where we can't control the outcome and we can't have faith in a happy ending. So that's a really hard thing for everyone. So if your creation is not rejuvenating you, if it's not centering you, don't bother with it. Write something else, write smaller things, if you normally work on prose, maybe try poetry. If you create some other kind of art, cook, whatever. I think that right now, because we're having to shrink our joy down into kind of bite-sized pieces, it's just literally in order to survive. That's just a thing that I want to say to you, that if you are not able to focus, maybe this isn't the project for right now. When it comes down to it, the only time I really feel like me is when I've actually managed to say the exact thing I wanted to say. There's nothing more magical than that sense of, oh my God, I got the right words and I put them in the right order. My entire life is about finding the right words and putting them in the right order. And I know that's one of those things we were talking about that being like a hard self-motivator. And that's definitely easier at other times than others. Yesterday, I told Mr. Blake that sometimes I feel like it would be so much easier to just not exist. And that can be true. But what can also be true is that I never feel more grounded than when I realize I've said something that I have been trying to say, that other people I know are trying to say, that is something that not only speaks to who I am, but also to how I fit into the rest of the world. That is what art is about. It's finding our place in the world. We all have a role. We have our gifts for a reason. And I know it's very distant and intangible to say that, hey, focus on what you're working on because you might make a difference for people, because you speaking your voice and identifying your truths might help other people to exist in this world. It's like a very ridiculous, intangible, maybe full of hubris thing to say. But I think that there is a lot to be said about how we are better, more productive is a hard word, but I think we are better, more productive people, we can support other people better when we are true to ourselves and our art. So what a weird direction that took. I don't know. I'm wearing a tiara right now. Take this as you will. So obviously I've talked for a long time. There is more to talk about. I did have two other questions. One was about the financials of self-publishing, which is something we'll talk about next time, and also stuff that inspires my current writing style, which I actually really love that because my writing style has changed quite a bit. I think there are some underlying things, but it changes, it evolves, whatever. We'll talk about that next week because I think we'll still exist next week. We're going to have to right now act as though we will definitely still exist next week. So, okay. Yeah, I will be working a little bit more on my writing posts. So if you would like me to focus on any topic in particular, please let me know. Other than that, okay, this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing. And I'll see you next week.